Endgame is arguably the most important part of a Fortnite game. Almost all placement points come from this part of the game, and it's possibly the easiest point at which to get kills. So in this video I'm going to be going over 14 simple tips to help you master Endgame in solos. So, I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get into it. I'd like to start off by saying these tips mainly apply only to stacked endgames, because unstacked endgames usually have a very different dynamic and tend to be filled with worse players, meaning they're much easier to play. These tips apply from first moving until zone closes. I've split the tips up into 4 sections: general tips, those relating to getting refreshes, tips specifically for taking and playing height, and then finally tips for the final 1v1. Starting off with general tips, tip number 1 is to try to claim your own layer, or at least to stay on a relatively uncongested one. This means that, unless you've managed to claim front low as zone opens, you should stay off ulti low, and the least congested layer tends to be 3 or 4 layers up from full low. The reason for this is that if you're on a really congested layer, it drastically increases your chances of being jumped in on by a player desperate for a refresh, and who'll just take a 50-50 with you. If you find yourself on a congested layer, the best way to fix this is simply move up or down 1 layer. Tip number 2 also relates to layers, and it's to try to stay off second height. This is because the player on height tends to spray second height the most, because they feel threatened by the presence of a player on second height. This means the player playing second height will waste a lot of mats holding against the height player, and could take damage from the height player spraying. The only situation in which you should move to second height is if you're trying to take height, but I'll get into that more later in the video. Tip 3 is a pretty simple one, and it's just to play dead side. This may be quite difficult earlier in the game, but in moving zones it's usually pretty easy to determine where dead side is. If the zone is pulling in a completely different direction from where it's just come from, the side that is opening up will be dead side, so you should hug the least congested side of the zone and try to rotate there immediately, ensuring you're protecting yourself while you move. When you get to dead side, try to claim lots of space. If you're on low ground, a simple 2x2 may be a good option, because this gives you lots of room to get refreshes from. Tip 4 sorta links in with the last tip, and it's to stay front side if you have sufficient mats. This means you can look back and spray players who are shambles and don't have many builds on backside. This is also the reason you shouldn't be playing backside, because other players will be on front side spraying you. Another reason for this is that you're now in control of your own movement. On backside, the storm is pushing you, possibly into other players, but you can't do anything about it. While on front side, you've got space to expand into and move around other players, reducing the chance of an unnecessary engagement. Next, tip 5 is just to make sure you've claimed all the builds of the box you're in. This may seem like common sense, but it's really easy in an intense endgame to forget that you don't own all of the pieces in your box. So, when you box up, immediately replace all enemy builds and place a cone or a ramp in the centre of the box. Tip 6 is the final general tip, and it's simply just to not panic and end up overbuilding. This is one of the most important things that players do wrong in endgame, and really the only way to fix it is to gain lots of experience from playing scrims consistently and playing in tournaments, to practice staying calm in these situations. So, next I'm going to talk about tips relating to getting refreshes. Tip number 7 is about the timing of the refresh, and it's that you should only go for a refresh when you hit 35 builds. This is because you're going to end up using most of the builds soon, and then you'll actually need a refresh. The reason you should go for it before you hit a critically low number of builds is because it means you can safely go for the refresh without just having to jump in on someone, because you can piece opponents and take good peeks. Waiting means you'll most likely have to take a 50-50 to get the refresh, which could end your game right there and then, or leave you low for the rest of the endgame. Tip 8 is to not overcomplicate fighting. Flashy mechs should stay out of endgame because it's more laggy both in terms of FPS and ping, meaning trying to edit course a player is not usually viable at this point in the game because you're more likely to make mistakes leading to your death. Simple, effective mechanics and fighting techniques should be employed when you're getting refreshes in endgame. Tip 9 is really important, and it's to not overcommit to refreshes. Even if you've hit a player for 180, if they're continuing to run and you're on a decent amount of mats, you should prioritise positioning over the refresh. Chasing the player could leave you in a terrible position, whether it's on a congested layer, on the congested side of zone, or even in storm. Also, prioritising a good position means you'll be more likely to get a refresh on someone else. Next, I'm going to be running over tips for playing height. Firstly, tip 10. You should be waiting until 11th zone to go over height. This means you have time to ensure you have enough mats, probably around 60 builds, to claim and hold height for the rest of the game, and the other player probably isn't expecting it. Additionally, the other player has probably been playing height for most of the endgame, meaning they haven't had the opportunity to get as many refreshes, so will probably not have enough mats to win a PG for height. Next, tip 11 is about the ways in which you should be taking height, and there are 2 main ways to do this. One of them is sneaking up on the player from backside. Now this is only really possible if you have medkits or flops, and I wouldn't advise doing it in Victory Cup finals, because those games can come down to a storm sickness heal off, and taking that storm damage could lose you the game. This also relies on the other player not noticing you're behind them, so it's not always that reliable. The more reliable way of taking height is to go frontside and crank to cut them off. Your opponent probably doesn't have as many mats if they've been playing height all endgame, so you're likely to win this fight. When using this method, you should only move to second height around 10 seconds before you're planning on taking height, because this means there's less time for the height player to spray you, and could give you that element of surprise that could allow for a really easy height take. Tip 12 regards when you're actually playing on height, and it's to ensure you're constantly popping a fall damage save, so Fizz or Nitro this season. This allows you to elevate, meaning you're less likely to get forward for height, and it means that if you get chopped, you don't have to stop and heal. Tip 13 is really simple, and it's to constantly spray if you're on height. You should focus most of the pressure on second height, to ensure they don't have enough mats or health to take height from you and cause them to panic, preventing them from wanting to take height from you. Finally, tip 14 is just how to play the final 1v1. This part will be split into two sections, heal off and non-heal off. In a heal off, if you're on height, you should continue tarping until zone fully closes, then pop Fizz or Nitro and run back into zone popping medkits. This means you have a chance to find more meds to win the heal off, and reduces your chance of being shot out. If you're on low ground in a heal off, you should continue moving until zone closes, building above you, and then you could just stay in the same position popping meds, or you could move back along low to try and find more meds. Storm Sickness heal-offs are a relatively common occurrence in Victory Cup finals especially, so it's important to understand how Storm Sickness works. At 500 storm damage taken, you'll get a warning, and then 10 ticks later at 600 damage it'll go active, where you'll take 30 damage per tick. At this point you'll need to switch to floppers if you have them, as these can out-heal 3 ticks of Storm Sickness before it kills you completely. In a non-heal off, if you're on high ground, you should continue tarping over the other player, as you'll probably have more mats. Then you should spray or use your shotgun to deal damage, building under yourself as you go to prevent the other player from shooting you. If possible, you need to try and avoid dropping down and taking a 50-50, as this leaves the 1v1 up to chance. If you're on low ground in a non-heal off, attempt to cover yourself and keep looking for opportunities to top height in back zone. You should try to capitalise on the height player over-peeking over the edge of their tarp to try and get shots off. So, that's all the tips. I hope you've enjoyed the video and can take something from it to improve your endgame. I'd really appreciate it if you could like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.